If Hannibal had won at Zama in 202 BCE, if the battle had gone slightly differently, Rome would have lost the Second Punic War. There would have been no Roman Empire, no Roman law, no Latin, no Romance languages, no Catholic Church in its Roman form. The entire subsequent history of the Western world depends on one battle in North Africa that Rome won and Carthage lost. The civilization that determined the shape of the world you live in was not the one that built the Colosseum. It was the one that built the civilization that Rome had to destroy because it was winning. This is Carthage. Carthage was founded approximately 814 BCE by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, in what is now Lebanon, on a promontory on the North African coast near what is today Tunis. The site was chosen with commercial precision, a natural harbor protected on both sides, positioned at the narrowest point of the central Mediterranean, where African and European shipping lanes intersect. Carthage's geographic advantage was the most deliberately chosen of any city in this series. The Phoenicians who founded it understood maritime commerce as their primary civilization. Tyre and Sidon had built the trading networks of the eastern Mediterranean for centuries before Carthage was founded. Carthage inherited that tradition and expanded it across the western Mediterranean, the territory Rome did not yet control. Carthage at its peak controlled a trading empire extending from the Levantine coast to the Atlantic coast of Morocco, including colonies at Cadiz in Spain, Palermo in Sicily, Cagliari in Sardinia, and Ibiza. Its commercial network was the most extensive in the ancient Western Mediterranean. The Carthaginian merchant navy was the largest in the ancient world outside of China. Its commercial innovations, the development of standardized weights and measures, the use of state-guaranteed commercial documents, the specific administrative infrastructure of a trading empire, were as consequential for ancient commerce as Venice's innovations would be for medieval commerce. The Carthaginian constitution, described by Aristotle as one of the best designed in the ancient world, included 2 elected judges, the Sophites, a senate, and a popular assembly, a mixed constitution that Aristotle compared favorably to Sparta and Crete. The specific problem with knowing Carthage is the most important analytical challenge of this episode. We know Carthage almost entirely through Roman sources. The Carthaginian libraries, containing administrative records, philosophical texts, agricultural manuals, and historical accounts, were burned when Rome destroyed the city in 1946 BCE. One text survived. Mago's 28-volume agricultural encyclopedia was translated into Latin and Greek because Rome found it practically useful. Everything else was destroyed. The Roman accounts describe Carthaginian child sacrifice at the Tophet, the sacred precinct near the harbor. Modern archaeological analysis of the Tophet's remains is contested. Some researchers argue the deposits show evidence of infant sacrifice. Others argue they are infant cemeteries for children who died naturally. The winner wrote the history. The loser's history was burned. Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps in 218 BC with approximately 38,000 infantry, 8,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. The crossing took approximately 15 days. Approximately half his army and most of the elephants died from cold altitude and Gallic attacks during the crossing. He arrived in Italy with approximately 26,000 men, weakened, cold, and facing the military resources of a state with approximately 300,000 available soldiers. What followed is the most remarkable military campaign in ancient history. In 3 battles, Trebia in 218, Lake Trasimene in 217 and Tunis 17, and Cannae in 216, Hannibal destroyed approximately 100,000 Roman soldiers. Rome was closer to destruction than at any other moment in its history. The Battle of Cannae on August 2, 216 BCE is the most studied tactical engagement in military history. Hannibal's specific innovation, the double envelopment. He positioned his weakest troops, Gauls and Spanish infantry, in the center of his line, with his best Carthaginian heavy infantry on the flanks and his cavalry on the extreme wings. The Romans, with their larger numbers, pushed against the Carthaginian center, which deliberately gave way, drawing the Romans into a concave formation. As the Roman center pushed forward, Hannibal's flanks swung inward, and his cavalry, having defeated the Roman cavalry, completed the encirclement from behind. Approximately 70,000 Romans were killed in a space approximately 500 meters wide. The double envelopment at Cannae is still taught as the tactical ideal in every military academy on Earth. Hannibal's strategic failure, winning every battle and losing the war, is the most studied strategic paradox in military history. The specific reasons are documented and debated. First, Hannibal never received the reinforcements he repeatedly requested from Carthage. The Carthaginian Senate, dominated by factions opposed to the Barca family's influence, sent only minimal support. Hannibal spent 15 years in Italy with an army that shrank through attrition he could not replace. Second, Rome's strategic resilience. After Cannae, Rome did not offer terms. It mobilized slaves, freed prisoners, lowered the age and property requirements for military service, and continued fighting. A civilization that refuses to acknowledge defeat after losing 100,000 soldiers in 3 battles cannot be beaten by tactics alone. The third reason Hannibal lost is the one that decided the war: Scipio Africanus. The Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio, 24 years old when given command in Spain in 2010 BCE, adopted and adapted Hannibal's own tactical innovations, defeated Carthaginian forces in Spain, and in 204 BCE took the war to Africa. Scipio landed in North Africa, threatened Carthage directly, and forced Hannibal to return from Italy, where he had been undefeated for 15 years, to defend his home city. At the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, Scipio's cavalry, supported tactics defeated Hannibal. It was the first and only battle Hannibal lost as a commander in the field. After Zama, Carthage signed a peace treaty that ended the Second Punic War and began the process that would eventually produce the Third Punic War and Carthage's destruction. Cato the Elder's specific obsession with Carthage's destruction reflects a specific Roman anxiety. Carthage had recovered from the Second Punic War faster than Rome expected. Under the terms of the 201 BCE peace treaty, Carthage was prohibited from making war without Roman permission, but it was not prohibited from commercial recovery. Within 50 years, Carthage had rebuilt its commercial prosperity to the point where it could pay off its entire war indemnity to Rome ahead of schedule. To Cato, and to a significant faction in the Roman Senate, a commercially prosperous Carthage was an existential threat regardless of its military capacity. Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, was the specific political argument that a commercial competitor, even one prohibited from military action, could not be tolerated. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, was the specific product of Roman political manipulation and Carthaginian strategic miscalculation. Rome demanded that Carthage disarm and relocate its population 10 miles from the coast, effectively destroying the city without a formal declaration of war. Carthage refused. The war lasted 3 years, primarily the siege and sack of Carthage itself. The siege was conducted by Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, who breached the walls in 1946 BC after 6 days of street-by-street fighting through the city. Carthage was burned. It burned for 17 days. The surviving approximately 50,000 inhabitants, from a population that had been approximately 700,000, were enslaved. The city was demolished. The site was cursed. Carthage ceased to exist. The specific question of what was lost when Carthage was destroyed is the episode's most important and least answerable inquiry. We know from Roman references to Carthaginian texts what Carthage produced intellectually. Mago's Agricultural Encyclopedia, 28 volumes covering the full range of North African and Mediterranean agricultural practice, was considered important enough for Rome to translate into Latin. The texts of Hanno the Navigator, a 5th century BCE Carthaginian explorer who sailed along the West African coast as far as possibly Sierra Leone or Cameroon, survived because Greek geographers quoted from them. References to Carthaginian philosophical, historical, and scientific texts appear in Roman sources, but the originals were burned. The specific intellectual tradition of the Phoenician Carthaginian world, which had contributed the alphabet to the ancient Mediterranean, produced a body of texts whose destruction represents the specific irreplaceable loss. The site of ancient Carthage near the modern Tunis suburb of Carthage, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contains the specific extraordinary remains of the civilization Rome destroyed. The Tophet, the circular military harbor whose design was sophisticated enough that Roman engineers studied it after the conquest. The Borsa Hill Citadel, the Punic ports, and the Archaeological Museum at Carthage housing recovered artifacts from the site. The site is simultaneously the most consequential and the most sparsely developed of any major ancient Mediterranean civilization. Because Rome so thoroughly destroyed Carthage that subsequent building, including a later Roman city built on the site, further obscured the original Carthaginian layers. The Tunisian landscape around the site is one of the most extraordinary in North Africa. The Gulf of Tunis, the Katban Peninsula, the specific warm beauty of the ancient Punic heartland. Carthage's most consequential contribution to the cities that built the World Series is the one that the city itself cannot make, because it was destroyed. The lesson Carthage teaches is the lesson of the historical narrative. Who writes the history determines what the history says. We know Carthage as Rome's enemy, treacherous, barbaric, commercially greedy, because Rome's writers described it that way, and Rome's destruction of Carthaginian texts prevented Carthage from speaking for itself. Modern archaeology has complicated and challenged many of the Roman characterizations. The child sacrifice evidence is contested. The commercial greed is indistinguishable from Roman commercial practice. The treachery is described by adversaries in a war. Every generation of historians working on Carthage has found a more complex and more sophisticated civilization than the Roman accounts suggested. The destroyed city keeps revealing itself despite the destruction. The specific contemporary relevance of Carthage's historical narrative problem is its applicability to every subsequent instance of history written by victors. The histories of colonized peoples, destroyed civilizations, and defeated cultures face the same fundamental challenge that Carthage faces. The dominant narrative was written by the people who had the power to write it and the interest in writing it in a specific way. The Borders Drawn in Bad Faith series, part of this channel's broader content, traces the same dynamic in the territorial decisions of the 19th and 20th centuries. The Economic Turning Points series traces it in the distributional narratives of economic decisions. Cities that built the world adds the urban dimension. The cities that were destroyed or suppressed have contributed to the world we live in, often more than the histories that survive acknowledge. Carthage's contribution to the cities that built the World Series is the demonstration that absence, the absence of a city, the absence of its texts, the absence of its own historical voice, can teach as much as presence. The series has examined what Venice built, what Baghdad preserved, what Amsterdam innovated. Carthage teaches what a city's destruction costs, not just the city itself, but the historical record, the alternative civilizational trajectory, and the specific bias introduced into every account of the ancient world by the fact that Rome wrote the history and Rome destroyed the counter-narrative. Every subsequent episode in this series benefits from the Carthage lesson. Ask whose perspective the history is written from, and what might look different if it were written from the perspective of the city that lost. 814 BCE, the most deliberately chosen commercial site in the ancient world. A constitution Aristotle praised. The largest commercial harbor in the Western Mediterranean, the greatest military commander in history, winning every battle. A civilization that gave the world its alphabet, and 17 days of fire that ended it. Cato said, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. Rome listened. The library burned. The history was written by the people who did the burning. The series continues next episode with Samarkand, the Silk Road's greatest city, the city where East met West for 1,000 years, where Chinese silk, Persian mathematics, Indian philosophy, and Greek art intersected in one Central Asian city that was simultaneously the most cosmopolitan place on earth and the most militarily vulnerable. Tamerlane, the great mosque of Bibi Khanim, the Registan, the specific extraordinary turquoise architecture of the world's great Silk Road city. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. Carthage must be destroyed. Rome decided. The destruction was complete. The civilization keeps being recovered, stone by stone, decade by decade, by archaeologists who refuse to let the burning be the final word.